Hello. This is the Chapter 7-1 Cell Notes. This unit begins with a discussion of what a cell is, as well as how microscopes are being used. We're going to be doing this lab on Monday. Make sure that you have shoes. I will remind you at the end of the presentation to have shoes, and in class we will have that discussion also. Closed-toe shoes. Okay, so getting back to this presentation, at the top of your paper, there's a line that says EQ, and after that, you're going to write down how our cell structures adapted to their functions. And that's what we're going to be discussing throughout this unit, but that is going to be our essential question for today. Okay, so the standard we're going to be covering here in the 7-1, 7-2, and 7-3 and 4 is that students should know the difference between prokaryotic cells, eukaryotic cells, and viruses. You should know how they are not only different in the way they look, their structure, but also how they work. There is substantial differences between these three different types of organisms. And actually, viruses, we don't even know how to classify them. So there's really two types of organisms here, and one we don't know what, but we do know that it infects the others. So we're going to talk more about these as we go through these notes. Okay, so here we have a nice diagram that you should get very familiar with. These are two at the top. You see two eukaryotic cells. Notice that they're very complex. Notice all the labeling that's going on there. You can see that they've got all kinds of structures inside of them. And then you could contrast that to the ones at the bottom. Those are called prokaryotic cells. These two are AKA bacteria. And those at the bottom have far less structures. They are very simple. They are substantially smaller than the ones on the top. They're just greatly magnified in this picture to look more or less the same size, but they're not. The ones at the bottom are very, very, very small. Keep this in mind as we go through this section and also for the as a test tool for study. Thank you. Okay, so what is a cell? They are the basic units of life on this planet. If something is not made out of cells, it is not considered to be alive. So a cell is what is needed to take care of life processes. So anything that's alive must be made out of cells. Okay, the cell theory. It is extremely important for you to know the cell theory. I hope that many of you guys have come across this in seventh grade science. But those of you that have not, or that did and totally forgot it, here it is again. Okay, so the first thing about the cell theory is that all things are composed of cells. So every living thing, anything that we call alive, is made out of cells. Okay, the second point of the cell theory is that cells are the basic units of structure and function in everything that's alive. In other words, you need a cell, at least one cell, to take care of what life needs to keep you alive. So to be alive, you need at least one cell you basically have to consume things and produce energy to run things. And the everything that we know of on this planet that does that need is made out of at least one cell. Okay, and finally, the last part is that new cells come from existing cells. Now, this was something that came very late in the development of the cell theory. Many people thought that cells came from they had seen puddles of water with nothing in them, and then all of a sudden there was little things floating around, and they thought, wow, those cells come from wet things or something like that. There's lots of stories and fairy tales that allure to uh, princesses coming from toads after they were kissed by someone or something like that. People made up all kinds of stories because they really didn't understand. Well, later on, as we got better microscopes and started looking at different things, we concluded that in fact all cells come from existing cells. Okay, so are all cells alike? Well, we find out that they're not. There are some there's some organisms that are only made of one cell. We call those one cell organisms unicellular or single celled organisms. So we're going to refer to them a lot as unicellular. That means that the uni stands for one. That means that those organisms, the whole thing, is made out of only one cell. There's also the type that are made out of many cells, multiple cells, aka multicellular. Multicellular organisms are those made out of a lot of different cells, kind of like you and I. Okay, so are all cells alike? Well, there are advantages to being multicellular. There are some advantages to being unicellular. Now, when you copy this down, the part that you need on your worksheet, you need to keep in mind that the answers are not going to come up. You need to think about what the advantages are of being unicellular and what the advantages are of being multicellular. And I encourage you to think of, okay, so unicellular, they're really small because they're only made out of one cell. So think about where they can live and whether or not they need a lot of nutrients. Is it easy for them to get them? Things like that. As far as the multicellular, think about the way you work. The fact that you are made out of so many cells, it allows you to walk and talk, walk and chew gum, and do different things at one time. So think about what kinds of things, what advantages there are along those lines about being multicellular. So this is left up for you to develop yourself. Nothing's going to pop up here, but it does need to fill in before you continue on with your notes. Okay, so here we have a plant cell and an animal cell. These are a little bit different than the ones you saw before. You're going to see these on your test. So these are directly from your book, and these are the ones that are going to show up on your test. So make sure that not only you could label these things by looking at the way they look, the shape of the picture, but also that you are able to explain what each of these things does. So make sure that when you go over the section of the organelles that are labeled here, which is section 7-2, that you learn what each of these organelles does. Okay, so I just spoke about organelles in the previous slide. So, what is an organelle? It's a small structure that is inside of the cells. There are all kinds of different ones, and they all do different things, so they serve different functions. They were named basically after the organs in the body. That's why it's like the name is so similar to organelles, because when they opened up bodies early on, they figured out very early that organs did different jobs to keep someone alive. Well, in the same way, they figured out that these small structures inside of cells to do different jobs to keep a cell alive. So they have something in common. So they were named organelles, like little tiny organs. And you should be aware that not all cells have the same organelles. Some cells have more, some cells have less, some cells have very few organelles. Okay, so how are cells categorized? Well, they are categorized based on whether or not they have a nucleus. So, very early on, when people were all excited about getting their microscopes, and those were like brand new items, people started looking at everything underneath the microscope. And they soon started seeing these things at the center of certain cells, not all of them, but some of them. They had this little like thing in the middle that was really dark. And they kept on finding it and finding it and finding it. And to some of them, and later on it was called the nucleus, but that's fairly not modern. At the beginning, what many of them thought it looked like was like a kernel in the middle. And in Latin, you call a karyote is a kernel, like at the middle, like a corn kernel. It's like the center little thing. And so it stuck. And to this day, we classify living things based on whether or not they have a nucleus. The things that do not have a nucleus, literally, they are called prokaryotes. And what it means is before the nucleus. So it is thought that the organisms that develop that do not have a nucleus, that they came along before the ones with a nucleus. So they were called prokaryotes. And then there's those that have an actual nucleus or that little thing in the middle or a karyote. They call that a true nucleus or eukaryotes. So you've got eukaryote standing for true nucleus and prokaryote it is for before the nucleus. So that is how we categorize all the cells that we find on this planet, whether or not they have a nucleus. Okay, that's what we look at first. Okay, so Here we have the slide that's showing the difference between a prokaryotic cell at the top. It's small compared to the eukaryotic cell at the bottom. There's different labels. You can see that both of them have a cell membrane. Both of them have a cytoplasm. But only one of them, the eukaryote, has a nucleus and organelle. So you can clearly see the difference between a prokaryote and eukaryote. They have those things in common. Now, next slide, you're going to see a couple more pictures, but the slide after that, you're going to get to write down more differences between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. You're going to use the information from this slide that you're going to label. There's a picture of this. You just have to label all of these in your notes. And then the next slide after the next one will give you a chart that you're going to use this one in conjunction with the slide that has the chart to fill in the Venn diagram at the center of at the bottom of your notes page. Keep in mind that there's three things, two of which are already labeled here, but actually three or four things that you can put that they have in common, that there's commonalities between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. There should be four things in the center where the prokaryotes and eukaryotes share characteristics. There's four shared characteristics between the prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Make sure you delineate those in your Venn diagram. Okay, this is the same picture you saw at the beginning, pretty much toward the beginning of the slides here. And this depicts, once again, the animal cell, the plant cell, and the prokaryotic cells in the bottom. So the two on the top are eukaryotic cells, more complex, like we just learned, they're bigger. And the ones on the bottom may look the same size, but they're not. They're much smaller. So those are prokaryotes, and the ones on the top, eukaryotes. So here is the chart that you can click through and write down in your one, two, three, the four differences, and there's some examples at the bottom. So prokaryotes are single-celled organisms, otherwise known as unicellular. So every single prokaryote that we know of is unicellular. They're really small compared to the eukaryotes. They are far more simple. They don't have very complex structures. They do have genetic material and it's not contained, but it doesn't have a nucleus around it, so it just kind of floats around in their cytoplasm. An example of these are bacteria. So all bacteria are prokaryotes. That's what we really find in prokaryotes. Eukaryotes. All eukaryotes are unicellular. No, eukaryotes are not all unicellular. That's prokaryotes. Eukaryotes, you have some unicellular, but there's a lot of multicellular ones, kind of like you and me. And cats and dogs and bears and grass and trees, multicellular organisms. Multicellular organisms and unicellular organisms can both be found in eukaryotes. Just a little aside, during our lab, the first lab that we did, the controlled experiment, we used yeast. Yeast is unicellular, but it is a eukaryote because it can actually do cellular respiration. In order to do that, you need at least one cell. Okay, so that's really a unicellular. That's an example of a unicellular eukaryote. They are much larger and more complex. Like you can see at least even the single-celled ones with a good hand lens. They are much larger. So the single cells that are eukaryotes are much larger than the single cells that are prokaryotes. You need a really high-powered microscope to see the prokaryotes. Genetic material is contained in the nucleus. Now, both of them have genetic material, but the one in eukaryotes is actually protected by the nucleus. And we're going to talk more about the nucleus in section 2. The examples of eukaryotes are all plants, all animals, a fungus, and yeast unicellular. Like I said, fungus are like mushrooms. We have some fungus that can live under your nails and stuff like that, but these are big organisms that spread. That you may think, oh, you can get a fungal infection and a bacterial infection. Yes, they are different, but a fungus is different than a bacteria. A fungus is made out of many cells, whereas it could be a single-celled fungus too, but it's far bigger than the one that's bacteria. So that's why we can usually not see the bacterial infections. We could definitely see the fungal infections because those cells are much larger. Okay, this is the Venn diagram that I was talking about. Now you're going to use things from the 4 items that you picked each in the little chart that you just wrote right above the Venn diagram on your page, and also from that picture that you labeled on the right, a little above this. You should use those things. Like I said, there should be 4 things in between in the in between section where you see the writing on this slide. That's where you have to write in what they have in common. There should be at least 4 things that I'm looking for that you get from the stuff that I pointed out before, and then fill out the sides and make sure you do this. And there's a really good question that you can add to your interactive your question sections of the difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes that you can add to this in your Cornell notes. A virus. So viruses are very, very bad. They're Latin. The word in Latin, the word virus means poison. That's how bad they are. You're going to see that later on as you click through the slide. They what they do is that first of all, they're not cellular. That they're not made out of cells. They're just made out of protein and DNA and wrapped up in DNA and RNA. And because they're not made out of cells, according to the cell theory, they are not alive. Therefore, they cannot die. I actually attached a nice video in the that what's a virus video that you guys can look at. It's really helpful in understanding how viruses work and why we don't call them to they're not alive and how they actually work and what they do to your cells. So please watch that. Please watch that as we are going through the different parts. As you after you watch this presentation, take your notes. Please make sure you make note of you watch the video after doing this because it really shows you what these things do. They invade cells, they replicate inside of them, and they it made the cells when after they're done their evil deed, they explode your cells and all the viruses go everywhere to infect more. So please watch the video to understand how this happens. They are not alive. They are in Latin. It means virus means poison, and they are very specific. Not every viruses that infect. There's lots of examples that viruses are very species specific. And like for example, rabies, only infects the things that are mammals and some birds, not all birds. Virus plants don't infect animals. So viruses tend to be very specific and they target certain things. So like there's the rhinovirus that only attacks like your upper respiratory system. Those are your cold viruses. Then you get your viruses that are like when you get infection, like even HIV, it only infects your white blood cells. We're going to talk more about that later, but viruses are very specific. They only do the very they attack only certain types of cells. The problem is when they attack certain type of cells, if those are the ones you really need to stay alive, it's a really bad thing. Okay, it's kind of like what happens to you with HIV. Viruses come in many shapes and sizes. As you can see here, there's a nice diagram there. There's the influenza virus that's taken with electron microscope right there. That's the black and white image. And then the HIV virus at the bottom. There are viruses that look like that. And there's many shapes. They're nanometers in length, so they're very, very small. A nanometer is if you take a millimeter and divide it by 1,000, you've got a nanometer. So if you take the ruler to those really small little divisions, the smallest you can get, you get 10 per centimeter, and divide one of those into 1,000. That's what a nanometer is. So we're talking about things that are super, super, super tiny. If the prokaryote looks small compared to the eukaryote, the virus looks like nothing compared to the eukaryote. Bacteriophages. A bacteriophage is a virus that infects bacteria. So here you've got a picture of one that you have to draw on your page. This is the one you have to draw. You have to include the labels. And in Greek, phagein means to eat. It's because when they first discovered it, they just saw that this would go into the cells and destroy the cells. So they thought they were like eating them somehow. Upon further study, it was found out that they don't actually eat the cells. And when you watch the video, you'll see what viruses actually do. But this particular type of virus, it's one type of virus, and this type of virus infects bacteria. So it's a bacteria infector. So a bacteriophage is defined as a bacteria infector. It kills bacteria by infecting them and causing them to explode and then release more toxin. So this is what they are, and they are that's not what all viruses do. There's viruses that attack only white blood cells like HIV and things like that. And we're going to talk about Ebola really quickly. Okay, you'll be happy to know that smallpox, pretty much all of you guys have vaccinations, which means you got shots that got your body used to them, so you won't get them. You also get chickenpox, that can cause all kinds of bad ailments, and it's not cool. But all of you guys got vaccinated a few years ago when you were little, so you didn't get them, but you're protected. I'll talk about that if you have any questions in class. Okay, the herpes virus. Many of us got it from our parents when they kissed us when we were babies. Most of us actually carry it around. That's a herpes virus type 1. It's a very common skin condition, and whenever your immune system is really weak, those viruses can kind of mess up the cells around your lips, and they hurt, and it doesn't feel good. But it's very common, and it usually takes you to get sick to show them. Some people carry that around and never show it because their immune system is that good. The other type 2, that's genital herpes, and that's usually not pleasant. But one of the things people don't realize is that those are a little more virulent. They come out more often, like once a month. And even someone that is not showing the genital herpes, it's a different virus. Type 2 is a little bit different. It shows up in your genitals, and they look like those little pustules you see there, like in your genitals, and they really burn and are very uncomfortable. And they'll probably show up about once a month. Okay, so this is a picture of an Ebola victim. It was actually of an Ebola victim. It's not made up. You get these hemorrhagic blood rashes all over your body, which means they're filled with blood and basically they pop and you wind up bleeding out of they come out, they're also internal and they mess up all of your systems and eventually you just bleed out because they all pop, even inside of you and outside of you. Ebola, there's a nice symptom graph, right? If it's symptom chart, so you can kind of read through it and see what you should be looking for, and that's what everybody in all over the world is looking for at airports right now because nobody wants this to go there. And it is caused by a virus that causes your body to do that.